It's screen recording now.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie, and Haley and Ashley chose to do our group research project on Hong Kong's umbrella movement and its use of social media. So the citizens of Hong Kong were promised universal rights in the upcoming election, but when they were denied these rights, they protested against the government, which lasted 3 months.
In our website, we have included an About Us page, our blog posts, as well as photos and videos that we feel represent the umbrella movement accurately.
The protest gained thousands of people, mostly students, who camped out on the streets to demand for the right to have a fully free leadership election that was free from the influence of China. The protests were called the Umbrella Movement due to protesters being tear gassed and using inside-out umbrellas to protect themselves during the 79-day movement. This movement was spread for the desire of democracy.
In the 1900s, China lost a series of wars to Britain and ended up ceding Hong Kong for 99 years and remained as a British colony up until 1997 under a special agreement, the One Country, Two Systems. Hong Kong would enjoy a high degree of autonomy and democratic freedoms, such as freedom of speech, the press, assembly, and the right to vote, whilst being a part of China. In 2003 and 2012, the umbrella movement was not the first widespread protest Hong Kong has come into contact with. In 2003, an effort to enact anti-subversion laws attracted fierce opposition from Hong Kongers who were concerned that their liberties would be abused. In 2012, the authorities wanted to reform the curriculum of the Hong Kong school system to include subjects related to the history, culture, and national identity of China, which were opposed by its residents because they saw it as brainwashing. In 2014, for weeks, tens of thousands of demonstrators occupied the city to oppose China's control over the elections in Hong Kong, fighting the extradition bill, commonly seen as the next move in China's violation of the sovereignty of Hong Kong. The sit-in demonstrations lasted from September 26, 2014 to December 15, 2014. Protesters blocked main areas and across the city in busy intersections that garnered international media coverage and the use of aggressive police forces. And last, in 2019, opposing the extradition law reform bill, the 2019 protests in Hong Kong would have permitted extradition to jurisdictions which Hong Kong had no extradition agreements, including mainland China and Taiwan.
The movement started as a way to gain democracy for Hong Kong and to be free from the influence of China. However, the younger generations, which were mostly students, were also standing up for political and economic reasons. The younger generation felt as though they would never be able to stand up in comparison to that of the older generation in reaching a similar living standard. In 2019, 5 years later, protesters started creating a "We Are Back" banner to compare the 2014 protests to continue to protest for justice. The Washington Post states, "From one generation to another, Hong Kongers will go on to fight for the same goal, which is genuine democracy in Hong Kong." The umbrella symbol continues to fuel the protesters' belief as they refuse to back down.
So just to go over the problem again and the main reasons for the protests, the citizens of Hong Kong were told that they would have universal rights to vote, and they were only allowed to vote, or ended up only being allowed to vote for 3 candidates chosen by the election committee, not giving them the freedom and the universal rights that they were promised. And also this was called the umbrella movement because protesters used umbrellas to protect themselves from the tear gas used by police. So the media played a big role in this modern day movement and was arguably the main reason for the popularity of the protests held in Hong Kong. Many school-aged youth got involved in this movement, sharing about it online with friends and on multiple social platforms. This helped spread the word, and day by day, more citizens were showing up on the streets to fight for their universal rights. The second blog post is about social media platforms such as Facebook and WhatsApp and how they mobilized the protesters and helped them use their voice. The media was also a helpful resource that shared information and political expression. It was even sometimes referred to as a social media revolution. Facebook was a popular platform to post about the umbrella movement. A feature was created where you could actually change your profile icon to have a specific colored badge, and each color represented which side you were on, either like with the protesters or siding with the government. This was an easy way to spread awareness and show support, but it also negatively affected relationships between friends on Facebook who had different views. Many reports said that family members would block each other because of different views. As the communication methods for the protests were mainly through social media, this movement also almost became like an online trend, unfortunately. Users of social media in Hong Kong were sharing posts and talking about the movement online, where it soon became a popular thing to talk about. Similar to the Black Lives Matter movement, the popularity and activity level of posts about the movement spiked for a few weeks and slowly died down. It is still talked about, but people no longer felt the motivation to post about it online, and 3 months later, the umbrella movement ended altogether.
Blog Post 3 explores the relationship and tactics used between the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011 and the Umbrella movement in 2014. The Umbrella movement was able to pick up many of the tips used in the New York Wall Street demonstrations to their benefit due to the globalization of the internet. Like the Occupy movement, Hong Kong protesters sat in on high-profile areas in the city, such as government buildings, to garner attention from the media and spread their message. The strength of the 2014 Hong Kong protests included mass street action and the occupation of public spaces through sit-ins. Like the Occupy movement, the 2014 demonstrations were a non-hierarchical and somewhat leaderless movement, which could have been expanded upon to achieve a much more seamless and planned movement. This is a weakness of the umbrella movement. An opportunity that was capitalized on is social media. Social media garnered more protesters to join the pro-democracy fight. Images circulated of protesters being sprayed by gas and dyed water by police forces, which ultimately brought out more people. Police forces, which will be expanded upon in the next few slides, remains a threat to demonstrators because of the violent brutality police displayed and continues to display towards the people of Hong Kong.
This blog post talks about the key differences between the 2014 and 2019 protests of the umbrella movement. There were many differences between the two protests. However, the main similarity remains that the protests are a continuation of frustration over rights and identity of the people in Hong Kong. The 2014 protest started out as a 3-day sit, but ended up spanning over 79 days as protesters took over our major passageways, which made traffic at a standstill. The protesters had tents and public bathrooms to turn the protest into a long-term occupation. The police used 87 cans of tear gas, batons, and pepper spray against the protesters who used umbrellas for protections. Very few protesters wore masks, and many of the protesters were young students who were hopeful for one demand, and that was the implementation of universal suffrage.
This crowd is trying to disable one of the new security cameras been put up here as kind of an experimental operation to start increasing surveillance in this part of Hong Kong. The ones on the outside are basically there to form a human wall to protect the identities of the people that are actually up at the post, breaking open these cameras, getting into the guts and ripping them out.
我哋會唔雨傘啦，我哋會用一啲可能噴漆將嗰個 camera 噴走咗啦。咁如果一啲 camera 好高嘅時候咧，我哋可能會用一啲強光。
Protesters in Hong Kong fear they're being watched and tracked when on the streets, and just showing up may expose them to retaliation from the government. More than 1,000 people have been arrested since the pro-democracy protests against China's growing control over Hong Kong started in June.
You might be doing something that you think is perfectly
This video depicts how Hong Kong protesters evade surveillance with tech and tactics used both online and on the streets in the September 2019 protests. In the video, protesters with iPhones are able to exchange files through airdrop because it is anonymous and an efficient way to spread information. They also use laser pointers to distract the police and blind cameras. Although the police have labeled these laser pointers as offensive weapons, meaning individuals who carry them can be arrested.
The 2019 protests were very difficult in terms of social media and how it was used to create a decentralized leadership through encrypted programs such as Telegram and LIHKG. The 2019 protests were considered decentralized leadership because the activists were broken down into smaller groups to do the tasks. The demands of the 29 protests included the withdrawal of the extradition bill, as well as they were calling for an independent probe into police action, amnesty for arrested protesters, and a halt to categorizing the protests as riots and universal suffrage. There was an increase in protection during the protests that included helmets, gas masks, shields, knee pads, and plastic wrap due to police increasing the weapons. The police used 3,100 cans of tear gas, 590 rubber bullets, 290 sponge grenades, and 8 beanbags. There was an increased sense of urgency during 2019 that led to the decrease of weapons and protective gear, as well as using more strategic methods to communicate and create tactics.
In this slide, we talk about if the protests were successful or not. And there's a debate around this because, yes, in 2019, the extradition bill was passed, and today it's actually influenced the outcome of many other protests, such as the recent and ongoing protests for the Black Lives Matter movement, as people have been using the same tactics that the Hong Kong protesters have used. But also it's still debated that Hong Kong still has a long way to go in terms of freeing themselves from China's influence and embracing their own democratic freedoms.
Thank you for listening to our presentation, and feel free to ask us any questions.